So difficult being a director in some instances because so often the vision of the film is just in my head, and it's my job to try to figure out how to get everybody on board to have this shared vision. And so sometimes during this process, as I'm playing Ryle or as I'm directing, there's just times when maybe words get stuck and I don't get it out the way that I want to, or we're running out of time, and there's always challenges. Every movie is a miracle.
Bunch of documents unsealed in this case last night by the court, and Michael Gottlieb, who is the attorney for Blake Lively, dumped all of these onto the court docket. I have had a chance to look through some of these, and I want to talk with you about what was going on behind the scenes, not only on the set of the film, but also during the promotion of the film and leading up to the promotion of the film. One thing that so many of you have asked me throughout this time is, what is actually defamatory about people pointing out that the marketing in this film was inappropriate? What is so defamatory about the fans organically calling out Blake about how she chose to market this film? None of that was actually a part of Melissa Nathan's strategy about how to get past the crisis of Blake dumping stories into the media about her complaints about Justin Baldoni. Now, if you recall, she had them sign this document in November of 2023, which outlined her protections to return to work. And in that, she was able to gain a ton of control on this film, so much so that even Mr. Baldoni recognized this in January. In January of 24, before they went back to filming, before they ever, had the meeting at the penthouse where apparently Mr. Reynolds screamed and yelled at Mr. Baldoni, Justin was telling his friends that he was going to have to try to find a way to navigate the situation. When Blake had used this document in order to get more control. In fact, on the 2nd of January, Justin sent this text to his friends. I haven't seen Blake in person since this safety letter accusation, feeling all sorts of things. She used the claim letter to gain power over the whole production, trying to find my balance, captaining a ship and leading it while it's being held hostage, how to give her most of what she wants while maintaining some of my own vision. And starting Friday, acting and working with this person who can and will use anything she can against me. It's all scary, yet I know I have protection. Starting this thread again, I will need emotional and spiritual support. And then someone responded that they were at the temple and they would pray for him. And then he got a bunch of messages from his friends, from his friend Adam, who was in the film, and from Rainn Wilson. Basically, everyone just sending him all kinds of love. So he was pretty clear that anything he said or did, Blake was going to find a way to twist and use against him. That's kind of what the narrative was. But he was saying this on the 2nd of January, before they ever went back to filming, that she had leveraged this letter to get more control of the film. So this isn't a retaliatory narrative that he developed as a part of this entire situation that has occurred since December of 2024. Okay. I also want to note something, that behind the scenes, back during the actual promotion of the film, there was a conversation that was happening online that was vastly different than the conversation that Melissa Nathan had put together for her possible narratives that she could do to flip onto Blake. And I figured out why they are so desperate to tie Shasti Flaw to this conversation, because the narrative that started occurring online had to do with the way that Blake and Ryan were choosing to market the film as sort of this flowery summer movie. And that was never a criticism that they ever discussed promoting. And in fact, much of what they were doing was responding to the fact and having to navigate that Leslie Sloan was shopping a story as early as the end of July to the New York Post, to Sarah Nathan, the same person that she actually subpoenaed and tried to claim that the article and the sourcing of that article wasn't her. and text messages that were shared with Brianna Koslow and it looks like a writer, Tatiana Siegel. These are texts that were between Melissa Nathan and Katie Case and the tag group back in 2024 on August 12th. And Katie said, someone has to tell them to grow up. They promoted a movie about domestic violence as if it were a silly rom-com. What did they expect? They also said, we could do a big story on bullying and breaking the strike. And he releases text messages with her. And Katie says, yep, 100%. And then Melissa says, I know this was because of us and Leslie telling me that I was the one who did team Johnny Depp and bots. To be honest, though, the tides were already turning. We saw that. Jed didn't come on until what, Thursday? And they said yes. And they said, we didn't tell Jed to go after the idea that her promo was inappropriate. That happened organically because people saw the actual movie and were like, wait, this is a movie about domestic violence that they were florals to. Zoe sent this to me on Saturday and goes, this is a crazy way to market this movie. Like, come on, we had nothing to do with that. This is crazy. She doesn't have a good reputation. All of this is organic stuff from real people making TikToks, not bots. They never told Jed that the narrative about her should be about the promo and that everyone should be outraged about the promo. And that is exactly what happened organically. And what occurred organically as a result of that is as the kick up was happening, as everything was moving forward, right? The algorithm starts going crazy on TikTok and everyone starts talking about how inappropriate she's acting in interviews. Like something is completely off. This feels weird. Why is she dodging questions? And then they start to take it up personally, the victims of domestic violence and Colleen's fans. And that's how I could imagine why people then start searching out other interviews with Blake where she's acting like a bully. And in that space, it would be a perfect place for someone like Shasti to feel safe to share that kind of interview. Because sometimes when you're a journalist, you can't share what you know about the people that you're speaking to. You guard your sources. You don't want to ruin relationships. You want to protect your access. And so sometimes you just keep things to the vest. But obviously, this was something that really was bothering Shasti. And so she had that space to release it. That happened organically. And then once she released that, Blake has this interview where she completely dismisses a question about how to speak to people that would want to talk to her about domestic violence, which felt dismissive. It felt like she didn't care. She wasn't seeing people. So it created like she lit the fuse with the way she chose to market it. She lit the fuse by her dismissive reactions to people that were victims. And then in comes the internet and they do their thing. And that's just how the algorithm works and how the algorithm rewards this kind of content. And then they also said they wanted them to put out a statement. So they say they want him to put out an effing statement. Do they know about what yet, though? Like what specifically he's asking for? No idea still. Does the Justin team want us to try and fight these fighting on the set headlines? They're so cautious, but they speak to baloney, and I can't get a read. So they weren't even the ones that were putting out the stories about fights on the set. That was all Blake. Something else that becomes entirely clear in these communications is that after they demanded that Wayfair put out a statement and then they finally get them to like cool down and not put out the statement, then suddenly Ryan Reynolds, yes, Ryan Reynolds starts to leak stories to the Daily Mail. And these stories that he's leaking to the Daily Mail are all about how crappy the film was, how he needed to come in to save it because the script was a complete disaster. Can you imagine? Remember how I had that letter that Ryan had sent to the police in Vancouver about how he needed to save pedestrians, he needs to save random people on the street, he needs to come in and save everyone from everything. Then Ryan, using his savior complex, now has to come in and save a movie. But this at the same time, he's telling the public that had he not changed and rewritten parts of the script, the film would have bombed and would have been terrible. So he had to step in and save it for his wife. He had to step in and let his wife's career flourish. Like his wife needed to be saved in order to achieve her goals. And Justin was super concerned about this. And in Blake's text messages that she shared in her amended complaint, she shared one part of a conversation where he says, my partners asked about flipping the narrative from this leak this AM about Ryan saying the script was a disaster and he saved the movie. Okay. But it's a whole conversation that she left information out of. And Melissa says, so actually it's working on our favor. Ryan looks the worst and continues to play into the narrative of them being awful. It's playing good for us, bad for them. And then Justin says to something about Ryan claiming that the female hired was a feminist writer, didn't know how to tackle a female film using their own words against them. This is an easy flip. And then Melissa says, but Tatiana Siegel from Variety wants to do a follow-up with us for a story similar. We've have a call with her later. And then Justin says, and the fact that they saved the script from what they think is a disaster after we had a greenlit script and there was a strike, basically implying that they were scabbing, meaning that they were writing during the strike, which is against the rules if you're in the Writers Guild, which Ryan is, which Baldoni says we should 100% lead them to. Oh, that bit I'm all over, Melissa says. It's a man coming in to say his female writer sucks and I need to save it. Let him drown in his own pool. And doing it while there was a strike, Justin says. I'm all over the strike. And then Justin said, there is no truce here. Someone should tell his team that we are ready to fight if they keep leaking this shit. I mean, Danny G, it's going to be bad for them. Legal shit. I'm ready. And then Jen says, I'm sorry, just out of the meeting, Justin. The RR story came out yesterday, and I believe and incurred further backlash. Media is already calling us about the scab issue and what Melissa is talking about for Tatiana Siegel, who is a big film writer. That's the story she's interested in. We need to be smart about how we hit back. Danny G has already communicated this and her teams have been notified. I don't want to lose sight of what the actual issues are. I know with everyone texting you, Justin, and sending you negative press, it feels like it's building, but it's actually not. The overall narrative is still very pro-Justin. I like Tatiana doing a larger piece on how problematic Blake and Ryan's comments are to the unions. So they wanted them to sign a truce, and then Ryan immediately runs to Daily Mail after they refuse to put out that statement. And he says that he needs to save the script because it's crap. And it was a script that was written by a woman with a book written by a woman. That was all Ryan that did that. So the misogyny for me projected here is not that Mr. Baldoni is misogynistic. It's that Ryan is actually misogynistic and doesn't believe that anyone is capable of doing anything better than him. And that he actually has better capabilities of writing about a female's abuse than a woman. And I just want to be very clear. Two things can be true. There could have been specific issues on the set. There could have been conversations that occurred that both parties, Blake and Justin, felt badly about. After all of these months, though, we have a good track record of seeing how Blake and her attorneys twist the most innocuous situations and turn them into a reality that's not true. Like, for instance, I can say completely that she told me I was part of a smear campaign and was being paid by Baldoni. So clearly that's a lie, right? So if she lies about things like that, what else does she lie about, right? And there can be moments on a set where disagreements between actors and directors and there's conversations and frustrations around creative direction. That can all be true. But what I think here I'm seeing a clearer picture of is that yes, there was challenges on the set of this film. Yes, Blake was making things extremely difficult for everyone involved at Wayfair, but Alex Sachs brought in HR from not Wayfair, but said, let's just have Sony take care of HR if they can, so that Justin, as the director and the owner of the studio, if any complaints come about him, it goes to Sony so that he doesn't look like it's a conflict of interest. And they all agree moving forward that that was the best decision. And that was in April of 23, well before filming ever started. Okay. So HR complaints can't go in, but they're not going to Justin or to Wayfair. They're apparently going to Sony. An agreement made by everyone, Sony included. And when you start to learn about the HR complaints getting leaked, the leaks of these HR complaints happen because Justin and Wayfair refused to put out a statement about what happened on the set and taking responsibility for the marketing, that it was a troubled production. When the truth about what was happening online really wasn't about bullying, it was more about the way that they were marketing. That was why most people were really upset. And you start to see that days after they refused to put out this narrative of this letter that they're taking ownership for everything that happens, you realize that they were preparing to use that as a PR tactic. So Ryan and Blake created this narrative about what Justin was doing to use it as a PR tactic to justify their takeover of a film. And when they refuse to take responsibility for their crappy marketing, they're contacting TMZ and they're sending them HR complaints because on the 14th of August, not only do they leak that hired Melissa Nathan as a crisis PR, that comes directly from Leslie and Ryan, but they also leak stories about the HR complaints. And Katie wrote, seeing the latest, newest TMZ attempt, do we start seeding he had to hire someone to protect him from the consistent attacks and smear campaign by Blake and her team? Let's find out if it's true first, as if it is. We knew about the 2 complaints from Jenny and Blake re the sexy comment, which they claim occurred in that film when they were filming in the bar, and he had asked her to take off her shirt or something, her jacket, because it was hot. And it was a really awkward scene because no one was wearing long sleeves and Blake was. And then he made a comment about sexy, and then that got them upset. So they referred that to HR. And he has never denied that, right? And Melissa says, was it HR though? And Katie says, yes. I just asked for further clarification though, because that information was conveyed at about 10:30 p.m., but I'm like 90% sure. And then Brianna says, I thought Blake and Jenny ran to studio. If there was a third complaint brought to HR, he could have heard about it. He would have heard about it. And that was never brought up. So the 2 complaints are literally from Jenny and Blake from the same situation. And then on top of that, there's another text change between all of the PR people, which includes Katie saying, hey guys, read the TMZ thing, read the HR complaints. Our understanding is that the 2 were from Blake and Jenny, read the sexy comment. Is the additional one from Jenny, read the thing with Jamie and her apartment in New York? Just want to clarify. And Jen says, we don't know. We're waiting to hear back from Jamie. And then it says, Jen says, I think we need to position it as claims that were already out there about the kissing and the weight comment, but I need more info. And then Katie said, adding Bree to Brianna, Jen, and Matthew are waiting for clarification. And then Brianna chimes in and says, is it even true? Who would the third person be? I do think we would see if they have details, reclaims. And Katie said, I do think the internet is going to have a field day with this. Not only is this sexist, talking about Ryan Reynolds because they shared an article about him saving the day, but it's embarrassing. If I was in Blake's shoes, I'd be furious if someone made it public I needed my husband to fight my battles for me or help me achieve my dreams. We do need to get clarity on the HR violations to have a full view of the field we're playing on, but we definitely have ammunition if we feel we need to use it. Yes, Melissa knows about the HR violations and discussed with TMZ. When you consider the fact that even before this went to the premiere, even before the film came out, Blake and her husband were already setting a stage where they needed to have some sort of narrative to explain why Justin wasn't at the premiere with them. They needed to have a reason for why they were able to take this film over. Why was Ryan able to write on the film? Why was Blake now the PGA producer? How was it that she got to edit the film? All of these were questions that seemingly couldn't be answered, right? Because honestly, how do you explain that you got this control, right? The control she received is inside that document. How are these 2 not related? You get control by making these claims, right? That's what to me feels like you're using and leveraging allegations that might not be true in order to get something. And that's not what you're supposed to do when you've been sexually harassed. But to be clear, and I just want to drive home the point that while they were the ones that were leaking all of these HR complaints into the media, whether true or not true, right? Justin and his team were behind the scenes talking about different types of posts they could put onto social media. Justin and his team had a responsibility to keep the page that they had on Instagram for the film, It Ends With Us, the ones on Facebook, all of the website for the film, they had a responsibility to make sure that they were promoting the film and putting out content to keep fans engaged. And at one point on the 17th, he shared something that someone that was on his podcast had said about him. Now, the link is broken, so I can't share with you what this person said, but he said, "This is an incredible post from someone we have worked with on Man Enough." He nailed it as it was my exact intention. Something I could post, and then this isn't coming from me, and it's honoring victims. Jen then said, "Let's boost this instead of posting it." Some of the comments here reference Colleen romanticizing domestic violence, and we don't want it to be interpreted as a dig at anyone. I know the video has nothing to do with it, but let's instead have third parties amplify instead of you right now. Understood. This is an example that if they wanted to really push this narrative that people weren't being sensitive to victims of domestic violence or were being or if they really wanted to amplify this conversation that the film was romanticizing domestic violence, which was another massive criticism that for some reason Blake ignores, because not only was Blake getting criticism about how she promoted, but the film itself got criticism for the way of the domestic violence was portrayed in the film and how the relationship and Ryle was romanticized as a character, being very sensitive to his abuse and why he abused, which is a constant criticism for Colleen Hoover. They had an opportunity to share something that had comments critical of Colleen, but they didn't. So if they really wanted to amplify this narrative that the marketing was insensitive, why would they then share the marketing that Blake and Ryan did on their Instagram page? Everything that Blake was getting criticized for was actually stuff they created and then Justin and Wayfair were sharing on social media because it was the marketing for the film. They didn't criticize her marketing publicly. They put it on their page. They followed the rules. They followed the lead. So really, who was smearing who? And can you now see just how much Ryan Reynolds was involved? After going through these documents and reading all of them last night and even into today, it's really clear to me something that is very obvious. Justin and Blake didn't get along from day one. They were having issues. Everyone at Wayfair was having problems with the way that Blake was behaving, how she was delaying the filming schedule, all of the changes she was making to an already greenlit movie and a greenlit script, which is a huge problem. When a film is already greenlit, it means the studio has approved that script, meaning this is the expectation that the studio has of what's going to be filmed and made. Changes to scripts after greenlighting can be a huge problem, and it also is a huge problem with the Writers Guild. So, with that being said, all this shows me is that yes, there were issues on the set. Yes, there were frustrations of creative direction. Yes, the two of them were consistently fighting about what each one of them saw and what they wanted out of this film. One of those people used sexual harassment allegations to leverage herself getting more power on a film because, again, if you really cared about not being sexually harassed and wanted him held accountable, you wouldn't then demand control of a film. That doesn't even make sense. Yes, put me closer and more in connection to my abuser. Who does that? Nobody. Nobody that's been sexually harassed would want more control, placing them at more of a space where they're going to have to interact with that person even more, right? And then it also just shows me that it was Blake and Ryan driving the narrative, and they were always on the defense, always from day one. How do you defend yourself when Blake and Ryan are trying to control your speech and you know that no matter what you say or do, and if you say no, they're going to drop your HR complaints. They're going to make up stories about how Ryan needed to save the film. They're going to tell everyone that you fat shamed someone and made them feel, like they were being sexually harassed and you lingered on your kisses. You know that they're going to use all of these things against you. So how do you defend yourself? Well, if you're Justin and Wayfair, apparently you spend $9 million defending yourself because apparently in order to hire the PR team and all of this crisis mitigation, Jamie Heath told someone they spent $9 million on this. Think about that. $9 million to defend yourself against the actress who co-opted your film. My goodness. Well, what are your thoughts about all of this? Do you see a clearer picture? Tell me in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed and click the bell so you never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, bestie.